It's the 2nd of June, 2015, and this is the audio podcast, episode 153, MIDI Wi-Fi CR.
Krr, on the end of that title, krr. That was Scott Hewitt. I'm Samuel Freeman, and you may have also heard moaning in the background there from behind the mystery hardware. It's Adam Jansch.
It's mystery hardware Jansch. Yes, and of course it is the audio podcast. You can head to theaudiopodcast.co.uk for the website and add to that /show/153 for the notes that we are using today.
Yes, and from that place you'll find links to stories that we mentioned, which this week is some news, some of which is a bit old, we didn't do a show last week, and there's a little bit of Plunder, and yeah. So let's get into it, Scott.
Okay, so
we'll see.
Yes, sir?
The most interesting thing about this week is that Studio 13 has been released. Studio 13. No, you don't get it, do you?
You mean Studio 1.3? I see what you did there, Adam. Gosh.
Oh, I see. It's called Studio 1 version 3.
Yes. This is the Presonus Studio 1. Is now on version 3. Good for them.
There you go. Couple of the main bits are the extended FX chains, which they then prompted them to create the multi-layer instrument features, and they've also brought in some pattern style arranging as well into it.
I think
kind of cool.
Probably the most important one, though, if you look through the What's New page, is new customizable high DPI UI with multi-touch support. Whoa! And of course, remember that Presonus Studio 1 is a cross-platform Windows 8, and there are lots of Windows 8 devices with touchscreens. So I think that's cool. I think it's something that we should have had more by now. We've had touchscreens for a while, and this one is actually saying that it's multi-touch. It supports multi-touch, which is good.
It is indeed. Did Presonus get the prize for the first DAW with multi-touch in their native layer? Is that? I can't think of another.
I don't know if they get the prize. All the other ones are kind of usable in some way, but the other good thing about Studio 1 is that the maximum version, the best version you can buy, is only £279, that's good value for something that's not Logic and backed by Apple, effectively.
Isn't Presonus? This includes integration with Melodyne stuff, doesn't it? Like for that full price.
Yeah.
So for that, I mean, isn't that
I think it's Essentials.
Okay.
It's a pretty. I've played with it Studio 1 a couple of times now, and always been incredibly happy, to be perfectly honest. It's in my experience, the main problem has just been the fact that it's not particularly popular amongst other users, and as a consequence, you always have that classic moment where how can we get one session from one place to another place, and when. If you're using Cubase or something like that, there's a good chance the person who's handing you the session might be using Cubase as well, and it just worked by fluke. But it's unlikely that people are going to turn you a Presonus Studio 1 session over. It's just very rare in that respect. But it's possible. I'm saying there are there is a Studio 1 Prime, which is on the way, which is which is a completely free version. And probably going against Pro Tools, who are now offering the free version, obviously. You can also get the working demo as well, which you can also try as well for a while. So that's, I think it's pretty good. I'm quite happy. I like it. I like Studio 1. Do you remember seeing it when it first came out? I think, it seemed a long way behind at that time, but it's definitely kind of caught up all the sort of ground it needed to, I think, very quickly.
Well, the other DAWs, what's going to be the next killer feature? Is there ever going to be another killer feature in a DAW? Probably yes, but at the moment, I'd say DAWs are kind of stagnant, so it's easy to catch up. at this time, and probably make something that's better than the incumbents, because the incumbents are years and years stacked on top of each other. You know, everything gets a bit complicated. But I think the Studio One is. Well, I tried it a few years ago, and I thought, you know, this is pretty decent. You know, it was simple. It seemed to make sense. I thought it was decent.
I guess the most likely thing to happen with, I just think let's just chat about what could happen to DAWs for a while, because it just caught my interest, I'll be honest. But one of the things that strikes me is that could happen, which could be kind of cool, would be for us to get away from the kind of hardware studio type recording kind of idioms that have existed for so many, that has existed for so many years in the space of DAWs, in the DAW environment, but really people's relationship to those actual objects is just gone. So, you know, that's somewhere that could be kind of, you know, I think that's where the next thing will be, because I'm really glad that every kind of, you know, DAW has decided to pretty much continue that analogy running, because for somebody who knows hardware studios, worked in them, and done that stuff, I understand that entirely, and it works perfectly well for me. But I'm always amazed that I spend most of my time with my students nowadays trying to explain historical equipment ideas so they can then understand contemporary software, which has been based on that historical equipment. And I think that's the thing that could change. In my mind, that's the obvious thing to change.
But how? That's the problem, is these concepts of recording are entrenched, and yeah, the digital things are they've kind of concepts are reasonably convenient to work with, I would say. How about this though? How about something really integrated, something like the Machine Studio, but for multi-channel recording? You know, I suppose that's Pro Tools with a Pro Tools fader desk. Or I see what you mean.
Like the underlying principles, that's like it's basically a augmented tape machine with the practice out. It's a linear thing, and there has been moves since the to live, creating a more non-linear approach. But I think that could go a lot further. You can have more stuff for making it more similar to audio middleware, like what's used in games, where you can create. Yeah, I don't know.
I'd say that live Wig are kind of the next generation, really, aren't they? They're like they've tack on how you sequence in a DAW and done their own thing with it.
That's true. Yeah. Sorry, let me pause because we weren't sure if I would finish with the breaking up robots. I never know if that's my end or everywhere, but
we're having robot time. It's definitely a moment of robot time there, Stacey. Yeah, Ableton's the obvious one, isn't it? Ableton Live's Interface is the obvious one to kind of point to, and remember there's like more historical approaches, things like renoise, I would suggest, in the kind of pattern-based sequences as well. So it's not exclusively the kind of tape hardware kind of realm, kind of emulation, is it? But there are other things in there. And it's quite interesting. In Live, I find is incredibly useful for a particular set of jobs, just because of the way it kind of works. If you, as an illustration, this is something I find quite often. But if you want to have, say, if you've got 5 or 6 blocks of audio that you want to follow on from each other, but you want to have some sort of controlled transition between them, then that's actually something you can build once in Live, and all you need to do is just drag and drop the 5 files into whichever order you want, and then you can hit export, and it will come straight out. And that's something you just can't you can't literally turn it into a drag and drop task in any other environment other than Live. And then combined with, say, a more performative approach, which Live is also very good for, it offers you those particular things, which is really quite interesting, to quite a useful set of tools to have available, I find. Let me see. Let's keep going. I think we should keep going. You know what I mean? Like, people are like, man, if that's them just into the news, they're just that's the end of news item 1. They're never going to finish. That's what they're thinking right now, I think.
Well, let's go through this one quickly. Tell the story by now. This was with Spotify and Sony Music contract, and
yeah,
dubiousness.
If you haven't read this, it's worth having a read. It is utterly outrageous if it's entirely accurate. If it is entirely accurate, we suppose it might be, but you kind of wonder if it really is. My understanding is that Spotify kind of allowed this to become public, and you kind of feel they maybe did that because they were concerned about being painted as the villains in this current story of why musicians don't earn enough money from streaming music. And this is a very clear, well, we pay loads of money, we just pay it to the we pay it to the label, and the label doesn't pay it to the artist. That's the problem. That's I don't know.
It's well, this document released as part of that big hack go, or is that completely separate?
Completely separate.
Sony movies. So.
Oh, that would be cool if we could find some internal documentation from Sony about it. I hadn't thought of that, actually. That'd be an interesting little journalistic project for somebody who's wanting to look into that more as well. So anyway, moving on again, because that's old news, and we talk about streaming all the time, and we can revisit that at the end of the news if we want to. Anyway, it was Google I/O this week, which was a pretty awesome. I watched the keynote presentation, which was pretty awesome, with 3 sides of the room being projected, being TV screens all at the same time, and 3D stuff. I thought that was cool. It was cool from a production point of view. But Google Chrome now includes built-in support for MIDI. Hooray!
Well, you have to auto-download version 43. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of amazing in a way. And what it allows you to do is actually have a MIDI browser. Interesting. But you could also do some interesting artistic-based stuff for computers that have MIDI, MIDI modules connected to them, and
cool. That's pretty awesome, isn't it? Really, pretty incredible.
Well, yeah, and I'd say that Google are kind of on a roll, because not only is Chrome getting MIDI, but also Android M will be getting MIDI.
Cool. Over USB Type-C connections.
Well, yeah, and even then.
Hello, Adam. Well, I think Adam began some insightful remark concerning MIDI over USB Type-C and has faded into the distance. Sam, I believe you're still there, though.
I am. I'm wondering, Type-C. That's the only thing available on those new Apple laptops, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, indeed it is. It's the connector which has the peer-to-peer thing completely sorted out. But not only that, you can plug it in any way around, which is pretty awesome. Unless obviously you were a company making money out of having created a connector that was very easy to put in the wrong way around, thus rendering your device completely useless and requiring you to buy a new one. Though in defense to Apple, they did abandon that connector a while ago. So it's kind of cool. It's interesting, isn't it, that I'm saying I looked at this article and I just thought to myself, isn't this kind of crazy that it's 2015 and we're talking about the fact that MIDI is going to be included as a new, it's like, hey, version 43 of Google Chrome now has MIDI. It's like, it's kind of fascinating that this is still the case and it's still happening here. And I thought it was interesting. I wondered, and I do wonder this, if what's actually happening here is that we're going to see MIDI, but maybe Google have got plans to use MIDI for some other purpose. Because the fact that they've rolled it onto Chrome but also pushed it onto Android over USB Type-C, and it was all announced. I know that obviously Google I/O, everything of this nature would be announced, but the fact they've done both of them at the same time, to me, feels as if there's some sort of future, there's some sort of project, some sort of future plan, and the connectivity is going to be MIDI, and therefore they felt, right, let's get the software.
I'm going to have to listen back to the recording to hear what you're saying. I think I'm getting very poor connection at this end. Hopefully it's been picked up by the broadcast recording. But there's this year. And the connection between the stories is, yes, there's obviously a connection there. I think, and also, in the true audio podcast of self-referentiality, didn't you mention that the Android project really to look some time ago? Wasn't that something like a fiction of yours? Native was going to Android.
I think we have jammed up completely here. This is a. Oh, Sam or Adam. Adam has returned, though, perhaps.
Here.
There we go. So we wonder what Google are going to do with their user interface, with their interfaces. For anybody listening back, there's a good chance that the recording is fine. It tends to be. So you'll be like, it's weird that they just don't seem to answer each other's remarks, but it's just because we couldn't actually hear each other. I think Adam was briefly here, may have fallen off again. He's here twice now. But such as it is, let's move on to our final news item, which is the Digital Music News is reporting that Apple Music will be released next week. There you go. Which will be, the 8th of June, and will come with paid and non-paid tiers. So, do we care, I guess, is the first question.
No.
Oh, hello, Adam.
Hi.
There we go.
I was going to say that I reckon that Google just happened to be going through a MIDI phase. I don't think there's a link between Chrome and Android getting MIDI at the same time, apart from they probably just happened to have a guy or a team who decided to do it. And while they were doing it, they might as well do it for both Chrome and Android at once.
You see, I understand that point. I guess what prompted me to think of it that way is Google were also announcing things like Weave at Google I/O, which is an open protocol standard to connect manufacturers, home automation devices from various manufacturers. And it struck me as MIDI's the kind of would be an incredibly weird but historically well-precedented choice for that kind of thing. Does that make sense? That was my thought.
I could control my home heating system using my MIDI keyboard. Okay.
Well,
interesting.
You could control it using anything that currently does MIDI plus all the experience that people have of working with MIDI.
I'll connect an arpeggio.
I think there is.
I'm being silly.
No, I think an arpeggiator controlling your lights would be brilliant. There we go.
It would be interesting. I don't care about. Basically, I had a little back and forth with someone on Twitter. And who else they could buy, which other music company buy, and they had in their list Bandcamp, and I was like, no. I hope Apple doesn't go anywhere near Bandcamp. Otherwise, I don't care, because I don't buy.
Okay.
So doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Well, I think as I'm going to head into the Plunder. Though I'll remind you very quickly to head into the Plunder. That if you want to, you can subscribe to the audio podcast.
Do that.
Oh. Yeah.
Hardware.
Oh, I think Adam wants to play Guess the Hardware, but Adam, you're a robot voice to me, which makes it really hard to play Guess the Hardware.
Okay, I'll answer via chat window then.
Well, I can hear. Okay, so what have we got then on the guess the hardware? It is a blue face thing. We appear to have some LEDs. One of them might be labeled lock and write, so we're talking about something that can do automation perhaps, or is that SMPTE maybe? We've got 8 channels of something.
Are
And
the LEDs at the top of the screen a different device?
I'm going to back the camera up a bit. There we go.
it's the same thing. We've got dials. Oh, I feel it's like,
I'll tell you, you are dealing with 2 different pieces of
okay.
hardware.
So the one at the top is an 8, but I'd say is an 8x8 MIDI interface, and I'd like to. It would be it. I don't think it's a MIDI split 8x8. I think rather is it what was possibly badged eMagic at one point.
Not just badged. eMagic did actually make hardware.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean. That's it. I think that is the eMagic MIDI interface, which was an 8x8, and I cannot remember it. Is it going to be called something like an MT16 or something like that?
This one is called the Uniter 8 Mark II. And okay,
we've got a Motu.
That's a Motu box, the other one, yeah. QMix DSP.
Which one is it then?
Is it the Traveler?
Yeah.
It's the Traveler. It's the okay. And the great thing about these 2 pieces of hardware is that they both still work on the latest version of macOS 10 on Yosemite, which is amazing because they're both over 10 years old. I think the Uniter 8 might be 15 years old by now, and Apple, to their credit, still provide a driver for that. And Motu, we know, are legendary for their hardware support, so no surprise.
Very cool. Very cool indeed. That's my official statement on that. Very cool indeed. Fantastic stuff. Okay, I'd started, but I'll remind you, don't forget, if you want, you can subscribe for free to the audio podcast. You'll get us on iTunes, Gpodder, and Stitcher. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube as well, if you wish, for the more live, visually pleasing version of the show, if you wish. There is the world's lowest traffic email list available to you as well, if you want to as well. So that's kind of cool. There we go. And if you'd like to contact us, I guess, you can send us an email, show@theaudiopodcast.co.uk, at the Audio Podcast on Twitter. Did anybody look at that this week?
Nope.
Also on Facebook, where we picked up a couple of extra likes, because Facebook tells me that when I'm in there anyway. So there we go. That's cool. Thank you very much to those people. That was awesome stuff. And
I
with
think
that,
one of those might be a bot.
Might be a bot, yeah. And with that, into the plunder. Into the plunder. Arg.
Arg.
Arr.
Cool.
Who's got this plunder in this week then?
Me.
So is this 2 separate things? Because I got a bit confused. Because we got actually, what happened when I looked at this plunder is I went to the O'Reilly website to read about audio in website user interfacey stuff, and then I got distracted by a free download of Python in Education and started reading that. That was, yeah, that's what happened.
I like it. Well, it's essentially it's a typical O'Reilly Radar article in that it's surprisingly in-depth, detailed, and long. I'd recommend it to you as something for your lunch break, perhaps, while enjoying the audio podcast. Like the next week's audio podcast, obviously, or the day after you've listened to this one here. And it is a discussion about the practical use of audio in web interfaces. So it's, like when you can use it, when you can use audio to help in an interface and when you can't, and kind of bring it into a coherent experience, which I actually came across because I was looking at something called elevator.js, which is a JavaScript, a little bit of JavaScript that makes your screen work like an elevator when browsing long-form vertical content, which was kind of fun as well. So that's how I came across it, and then I was like, hey, this is plunder-worthy. It's plunder-worthy indeed. But I think it is the only item of plunder, and as the only item of plunder, that would mean that we are approaching the end of this week's show.
It's been a rocky ride this week.
It has indeed been a rocky ride. has indeed been a work around. I'm not here next week. These guys don't know this, but I'm not here next week. It's a surprise to them. I'm actually at In Music 2015 at Cambridge. There you go.
Cool.
So I may produce some content from there, possibly.
And also, I'm not going to be free either. So.
Oh no! Which means that if the
Sam will be doing the podcast alone.
Which means there will either be no podcast, Sam solo on Tuesday, or perhaps we'll have an audio podcast recording on Wednesday or something instead. Where you'll see how we feel about these matters. So it's a classic situation. The audio podcast will return at some point in the future. But for now, I've been Scott Hewitt.
I have been and am Samuel Freeman.
And I am and will continue to be. Thank you.
Goodbye, Robot Adam.